Welcome into Sports Around the Bar, your sports talk show, I'm sure. As always, I am Jake, your bartender. I'm Jake, your bartender, and I am joined here on Center Stool by Drew. And guys, welcome in. It's your Tuesday show where you're going to get to talk about everything you want to talk about as well as what we want to talk about. Let's face it, we're still talking about what we want to talk about, but today's your day. If you want to ask about something, if you have a topic that's burning a hole in your soul and you want to know more about it or you want to ask our opinions on it, today's the day you do that. Welcome into the show. Drew, glad to have you back, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, had to do some stuff for the family and all, but I think everyone is burning. The question's burning is how much more Chiefs stuff can we get on this bar?
We talked about it beforehand. I was like, how much is too much Chiefs stuff? And you said there's never enough. Is that true?
Yeah, we need more stuff.
I'm not seeing a lot of Titan representation over here.
That's not my fault that you're a terrible fan.
It must not. But, guys, again, welcome in. Steve, good to see you. He says it's lagging. Let me check our statistics. 10% of drop frames. That's not good. All right. I'm going to stop it and restart it, so we will see you in just a second. All right. We'll give this another swing of the bat. Second time's always the charm for us, right?
Absolutely.
No, 48th time's the charm for us. So, guys, welcome back into Sports Around the Bar, your favorite sports talk show, I'm sure. If you didn't catch it the first time, I am Jake, your bartender, and I'm joined on Center Stool by my co-host, Drew, who we're glad is back. Drew,
Thank you.
Welcome in, man.
I appreciate it, and we were just discussing how much more Chief stuff do we want on this bar. That is the most important question is, how much more Chief stuff do we need on this bar?
How much more Chief stuff can we fit on the bar is the real question, honestly. I mean, they're taking over here. It's
I was thinking about painting the bar red.
It was one, now you got the helmet. It was the cereal box. It was the football. I'm just saying, Drew, you have an addiction, okay? We're going to have an intervention here soon if it keeps getting worse.
God, I'm just thankful I'm not a Titans fan.
And probably Chargers fan after you watched the way that game ended. Chris, good to see you, man. Sean, we're glad you're back, man. We have a lot going on here. Why don't we start by talking about Sunday Night Football, the most entertaining game of the week.
Yeah.
17-7.
I actually have a very bold statement that you're gonna be shocked by my bold statement, but I'm gonna wait until this game happens that I say my bold statement.
Bold statement is that Mitch Trubisky may not be the Bears' starting quarterback, especially when you see that they benched him at the end of the game and put Chase Daniels in there for crunch time. I know they said there was an injury.
A hip pointer.
I know they said there was an injury, but if that's Patrick Mahomes and he has a hip pointer, and this is like season's on the line because 4-7, you're pretty big long shot, or 4-6 to go into the playoffs because you're the Bears. Are you playing Patrick Mahomes with a hip pointer?
No, you play Matt Moore.
Yeah, I don't think so. Again, I think you have to play your starting quarterback. I know his hip is sore and everything else, and he's like, oh, it deteriorated. He kind of had a little bit of a fumble where he said it happened in the second half, but then they said they talked about it at halftime. So who knows if he's telling the truth? Who knows what's going on? What I do know is that even with him or without him, the Bears had nothing going on offense at all. I mean, week in, week out, it's been the same story for him. Is it time to admit that Matt Nagy might have been a mistaken head coach, or do you think last year kind of makes up for this year?
As far as the Bears go offensively, I think it's just way too much to sit there and blame on one person. I do think Matt Nagy is an issue. I think his plays are offensively are too easy to read for defensive coordinators. I think that is an issue because you don't have a big-time playmaker in a quarterback position. You have Mitchell Trubisky, which I'm not going to sit there and throw him under the bus and say he's the worst mistake. He's the reason all this is going on. I know Steve says bench Trubisky already, but I get it. But you got to remember kind of what you gave up for him. As far as an organization goes, they traded up for him. They gave first-round picks up to move up one spot to draft this guy. It's kind of like the Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota scenario where it's you play him out your rookie year. That doesn't mean you can't go out and draft another quarterback, but it's not like you could just get rid of him. You can't just bench him for Chase Daniels. You already know what you have in Chase Daniels. He's a journeyman backup. That's about it for him. So you're pretty much stuck with this until something else. So when you talk about benching him, does Chase Daniels give you a better chance to make the playoffs? No, it doesn't. Mitch Trubisky is a better option at quarterback to get you in the playoffs because we really don't know what the ceiling is in this young guy. I think what needs to happen here is Matt Nagy needs to step away from the play calling. It needs to go to the offensive coordinator or the quarterback coach or whoever they feel comfortable calling plays during games, because right now Matt Nagy's offense is too easy to read.
I totally agree with you. I think Matt Nagy is... It's almost like now that they have 16 games worth of film on Matt Nagy and what he wants to do and the things he's kind of pulled in the past, he hasn't done a good job of adjusting the game plan to kind of counteract that. We've seen some of that with Sean McVay, where, going into last year, nobody had an answer for him. Now that they have a full offseason worth of study and teams have started looking at the Rams and looking at the Bears and what they've done, we've seen teams really shut down these offenses that were they were high-powered last season. I don't know if the Bears, I want to call them incredibly high-powered, but they were a lot better than this.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why we're seeing Mitch Trubisky taking this step back. I'm not with some of those people saying it's time to move on from Mitch Trubisky. It's been 2 years. You just spent, the second or third second pick because you traded up to go and get it. You just spent the second pick on this guy. You got to give him at least another year to develop before you're ready to even think about drafting a quarterback.
Plus the first-round pick the next year.
Sure,
Remember, they traded up. So
exactly. So it's way too early to be talking about moving on from Mitch Trubisky. I understand the frustration, but last year wasn't bad. If last year stunk and this year stunk as well, then you have an argument for saying, okay, maybe he's not the guy. Maybe it's time to move on and get somebody else. But you have to look at last year and say, okay, if we do the right things, we can succeed with this guy. Because let's face it, they were very, very close to beating, the Eagles in the playoffs. All they needed was Cody Parkey to sink a kick, and they move on to play the Saints, and who knows what happens after that. Right. So this team that was not far removed from the NFC Championship, the second round of the NFC playoffs, we're talking about it's time for them to move on, and they don't need to be they don't need to be having the same quarterback. Too much talk too early on this one.
Absolutely. Frank, good to see you. Brian, good to see you as well. Scott, also good to see you. But Frank says everyone has tape on Chicago now. They didn't know what to expect last year. I think me and Jake both agree with you. And Scott says, what are coaches for? Aren't they supposed to coach up players?
Yes.
And that is an issue, I think, with a lot of NFL coaches right now. I think you have that with Matt Nagy. I think you had that with Freddie Kitchens. I think you have that even with, maybe you could probably say, the San Diego's head coach.
Anthony Lynn. Where but then again, they're a convenient scapegoat. When things aren't going well for the team, it's easy to say, coach isn't doing his job. 2 out of those 3 teams, well, I guess you could say 3 out of 3 if you want to call Cleveland's year last year success, where they won, 7 games.
Yeah.
You could say 2 out of the 3 of them at the very least have had great years last year, and then this year hasn't gone that way. So again, too early to be talking about moving on, even from a guy like Matt Nagy, who has been combative with the media, who's been very defensive anytime anyone wants to ask him why. I think he hasn't handled things very well. It's still too early to be talking about moving on from him because sometimes things just don't go your way. Sometimes people read the offense, like you said, and you have to take another year and just come back and readjust. Now, if next year looks like this, we can talk about moving on from Matt Nagy. We can talk about moving on from Anthony Lynn if the Chargers underachieve again like this. But you can't every time you have a bad year fire the coach and expect to be a good franchise. That's how you turn it into Cleveland, where you have a revolving door of coaches and quarterbacks. You have no consistency. Sometimes you just have to say this wasn't our year.
Right, but both Anthony Lynn and Matt Nagy have not. This isn't their first year. This is year 2. This is year 3. There is.
And both were playoff teams in year 2.
I'm just bringing it up. It's not just year 1. Michael, good to see you. Eric, good to see you as well. He says, how do we think Carolina Panthers will do for the rest of the year?
Well, let's talk about their schedule because we are going to talk about this coming up. They're in the playoff hunt, but at 5-5, sitting behind teams like the Vikings and Seahawks with 8 wins, they got their work cut out for them if they're going to pull their way into a wild card. The NFC just super competitive, man. Some of the best teams are out on that side, but let's talk about the rest of their schedule. When we look at Carolina, right now, we're going into Week 12. They go on the road to face the Saints. They get the Redskins at home, Atlanta on the road, Seahawks at home, Colts on the road, and then New Orleans at home. That, back and forth road home game kind of split. They get the Saints twice. That's going to be a tough matchup, but if you can win those games, we're talking about them being back in contention. I think those are the 2 most important games because they're both in division and against a team that is several games ahead of you.
Sorry, my wife is poking fun at me. She says, go Chargers. She goes, oops, I mean the Chiefs. Funny. Just don't call the police when you hear screaming earlier, okay, neighbors? Appreciate it. Completely joking. Frank says, I'm sorry, I got another comment before that. Brian says, can't be shut down with a quarterback who's poised in the pocket and weapons who can make a move and get open. In failed passing games, one or both are missing. I think he's talking about the Chargers and I believe and the Bears, talking about how there is issues on both sides of the opposite side of the ball where it's on the ground and it's through air where they're both struggling. Though if we want to talk about Monday night, Chargers had no problem moving the ball on the ground. It was the air game.
Yeah, and then they just chose not to do it.
Versus like versus like the Bears, they struggled on both sides of the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Bears, a lot of it has to do with progression of the offensive line. They haven't been as good this year, even though a lot of the same guys have returned on this offensive line. Last year, they were somewhere hanging around number 9, number 10, number 11 in the league, and you saw a lot of success. This year, they're down towards the 20s. They're not protecting Trubisky as well. They're not opening the running lanes, especially for these running backs. And I think a departure like Jordan Howard, when you're losing a power back like Howard can be, where he runs with authority, you're not going to be able to replace him with a rookie running back and just expect things to be exactly the same out of the gate. It happens once in a while, but you can't count on it. And I think that's almost what the Bears did. They said, we don't need him. We don't like the attitude. We'll push him off and get no kind of draft pick out of Philadelphia for him, and things will just be fine. Well, they're finding out now things aren't so fine. And I'm not the running back guy, right? I say it all the time. Running backs aren't super important to me.
Right.
You don't necessarily need to trade your 3-down back in Jordan Howard, or a guy who can be a 3-down back, for a 5th-round pick. I think that's where things started to go wrong for the Chicago Bears this year.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from that statement, because I think you're absolutely right. When you lose a player like Jordan Howard, who I agree with you is a 3-down back who could play, the receiving downs as well, it's not easy to replace. But I don't want to take away from what David Montgomery can do. He is a rookie, and he does need to get some experience underneath him. But you got to think, when they bring in Tariq Cohen and they don't allow him to actually get those passing downs, how much do you know you have in Montgomery? I think you kind of know what you have in Tariq Cohen. Sitting at 5'6", 190 pounds. I mean, he's not an every down back. He's not going to go through the tackles.
So what are we going to do?
It's okay.
Try to make him the every down back when the season starts.
It's okay to put him in the slot and